So I'll ask you and I'll do the second question, but
Okay.
what what was one of our goals or one of our primary goals when we wrote to lead without blame?
Well, at the very beginning, we had been asked to write a book about retrospectives for a broader audience. I mean, interestingly, it sort of morphed over time into a book that was more about leadership than about retrospectives, although we do include some of that information in there. But um, but it had to do with what audience did we feel was not being served by a lot of the other books that were out there, particularly, focused toward agile people, but for comparative agility purposes, but also a broader audience than that in terms of who knows about retrospectives and so on. And so we really landed on both at the time and still now, both of our hearts were really with our leaders. We keep complaining about how leaders aren't doing what they need to do for teams and for their organizations, but who's supporting the leaders? Who's helping them understand what might be a better way to get the results that they're looking for? And that is kind of counterintuitive for a lot of people. And so that I think that was kind of what started us down the path and where we really both landed on, it is this culture of blame that is getting in everybody's way. And so we decided to tackle that. Yeah. Is that how you
And that
remember it?
Yeah, no, I was like, oh, that's
Okay.
well said. We should have, oh, it is recorded so we can transcribe that. But and that's the interesting part is because I really don't believe that anybody's walking around going, who can we blame today? Like that's not the intent. And yet that doesn't mean that's not what the impact is. That doesn't
Right.
mean that's not what is experienced or felt or sent as a mixed message in the
Yeah.
organization, despite the good intent, right? And a lot of leaders are reinforced into that type of approach, right? Hold them
Right.
accountable. And what does that look like? And what does that mean? And so I think that that's where we started to really, to your point of counterintuitive is going, well, what is things that a learning leader would have to take into account? If you really wanted to create this resilient learning environment, if you really wanted to create a space without blame and shame, what are you going to have to show up with as a leader?
Right. Exactly. And, Deming said, systems or some, I'm paraphrasing here, but Deming and a lot of other folks have said the systems drive behavior. And so what we what we understood was people in leadership roles, even with the best of intentions, even with all these other things, are stuck in these systems that are encouraging blame, encouraging the kinds of behaviors that are exactly the opposite of what is going to get them the outcomes they're looking for. And that's, that is also part of the counterintuitive part. So yeah, so I had been working a bit with some ideas about what would those behaviors look like, and I'd been playing around with the C's, and then you and I started talking, and we adjusted a bit how we wanted to frame that and how we wanted to present that. And that's where we came up with the four C's model, the four C's for learning leaders. The other piece of this is I want to just insert here is that there's a lot of research that has been coming out in the last few years about if you need your workforce and your peers to work collaboratively to get the innovation and creativity that comes out of that kind of diversity of thought and diversity of perspectives, then you need a form of leadership that the academics and the researchers are calling autonomy supportive.
Mm.
And in my idea and what we kind of came up with is those are leaders that support learning. Those are leaders who show that they learn themselves and that support other people's learning because the world is moving so fast. We're moving into this whole learning work arena. And so with those things in mind, well, so what behaviors are we looking for leaders to be working with their peers and working with the folks who look to them for leadership? What kind of behaviors do we need to be seeing from those folks? And so that's why the model is called the 4 C's for learning leaders. And there's a deliberate little, not a pun, but there's a deliberate little double entendre. I've been studying French, double entendre in that. It's leaders who are learning themselves. They're learning leaders, and they are leaders of other people who need to be learning. And
Yeah.
so they're leading the learning as well. And so that's how the name of this model came about.
Because when comparative agility came to us and said, hey, we want to do some of what section of the book might you want, we could have gone in a lot of different ways. And there is, we're very clear about this in Lead Without Blame of saying there is no one checklist. Like you can't just do this checklist and then you're going to have a magical situation. Because if anybody tries to sell you that, we want names. But like, but there are things that can be a little bit more not objective in the application, but objective in the concept in terms of what you're prioritizing, what you're focusing on, what you're considering and thinking about and learning about with that. And so when we boiled it down, we actually decided to start with the 4 C's. And I imagine that at some point where you're going to see additional comparative agility assessments from us, especially within Lead Without Blame. But we really wanted to start with the 4 C's because it is fundamental in terms of how leaders are approaching the other things that we are calling out in Lead Without Blame.
Yeah.
So we want to highlight what those 4 C's are.
What
Do you
would
want to
you,
share
yeah,
this
I'll share a
real quick just
slide.
so that they have a visual while we're mentioning
Yeah,
them?
there we go. Yeah, there we go.
So one is courage. And courage is one of those things where you can't just look at somebody and go, have courage. It's like telling somebody to calm down. It doesn't, it's not something that's you just tell them and they're like, oh, okay, I'll be courageous. It's like, no, but it is a willingness, an ability to keep moving forward, to be willing to discover, to encourage in the difficultiness, is that even a word, in the difficult situations, and being not even necessarily okay, but knowing that there's a responsibility to still ask that question or still to create that right environment, to go against the status quo that everybody's telling you this is the right way to do something, or this is how it's always been done, famous last words that just make my hair on the back of my neck go up. And courage is really showing up when it's easier to just kind of go along.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the aspect of it too is that particularly if you have a formal, as opposed to informal leadership role, if you've got a title, if you're a manager or someone in a role like that, there is this false expectation that you will have all the answers. If anybody gets in trouble, they can just come to you for the answers. None of us can have all the answers. And I think that's a source of a lot of imposter syndrome for many people in leadership roles, is they know they are expected to have all the answers and they know they can't and they don't. And so that I think leads to some pretty dysfunctional behaviors, well, as people try to put on this image of having all the answers. And so part of courage is being willing to let go of that
To
and
say
just
out
say,
loud, I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. But what I can do is I can join you in going and figuring it out. I can give you whatever you need to be able to go figure it out, to do the discovery, and that's what we mean by leading discovery. Being willing not to just, oh dear, we don't know, but say, no, but we can learn, right? We can learn our way through this question that right now we don't have the answer to. And I think that's hugely important. It's a big shift for a lot of people and deserves a lot of support.
The second
Yeah.
one, and these aren't in order, so it's only second on the screen. There is no
That's why it's
order
a
to these
spiral.
per se. They continue.
Yeah.
Is the second one we'll talk about is compassion. This is that we're so hard on ourselves. I remember I used to always say, oh, if I just apparently I need to call myself stupid once a day, right? Like,
Yeah.
or just having this like high expectation and high bar and forgetting how hard learning is, right? Forgetting how difficult and challenging it is to even be willing to learn when we have so many systems in an organization that sometimes set us up to not want to learn, right? To not want to risk failure or risk even that discovery and that exploration. And so, where am I showing up in terms of compassion, right? Where am I showing up in terms of compassion for myself, for others, for the team as a whole, the organization? Am I, like how am I approaching it with what kind of care?
Yeah. Yeah. It has to do with understanding that a lot of people carry a lot of baggage around learning. They may have been smacked down for wanting to learn something in the past. They may have been told that they're just doing it wrong or whatever, and so getting past that can take some time and patience, and there's always a learning curve. People aren't going to be able to just flip a switch and be able to do or understand the new thing. And so yeah, compassion, I think, is hugely important here and as you said, Tricia, for self and others. Um, it's this isn't so easy to just say, oh, well, now we have to learn. It's not
Just
like,
do it.
and now
Just
we
fine.
dance,
What's your problem?
Yeah.
What's the big deal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And next one is complexity. And in the agile space, we talk about Dave Snowden's complexity versus complicated or clear or chaotic. And the reality is I love it. You always say, and I'm starting to leverage this, is we went from the agricultural era to the industrial era to the learning era. Some people will say AI era and things like that, but the learning era, because I don't even know if there is such a thing as complicated and clear anymore in this world. It feels completely like it's just chaos and complexity, right? And so if we're in this constant state of learning and we need to deliver outcomes or handle whatever's coming our way, whether it's a pandemic or what else, fire, tornadoes, or inland hurricane. I mean, there's just been crazy, crazy things to where how are we embracing that emergent information? How are we embracing the discovery? I mean, it doesn't matter if you have all the courage and compassion in the world to do the discovery if you just ignore the results. If you don't take that into consideration, even if it blows up your original plan and what that meant. And so when I think about complexity, it's kind of going to your statement earlier of like behaviors within a system, right? I'm looking at that bigger picture of things that are involved to understand so that I can be more compassionate and courageous, right? It almost feeds off of each other in a lot of ways because the more that I embrace complexity and that nothing is simple, the easier it is for me to have courage and compassion in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, and the reason that we represented this model with a spiral is that these are all self-reinforcing. The more you show courage, the more it leads you to recognizing the complexity in the situation because you're not looking for the pat answers anymore. The more you are compassionate, the more you maybe are willing to be more courageous. They all reinforce each other, and so you can dive in at any point. I mean, the on comparative agility, we're giving you some ways of sort of looking at your own behaviors and saying, well, to what extent am I doing any of these things? And if it's a lot, great, congratulations. If there's some places that you'd like to shore up a bit, that would give you some ideas for how to do that. I think the last one is confidence. And confidence is, I always like to say to people, confidence is not showing confidence, having confidence in the people that you're working with and whether they are reporting to you or whether they're your peers, having confidence that they can get done what needs to be done is really essential. And it's not another thing that's not so easy, and it's not cheerleading. It's not just saying, oh, I know you can do it, right? Without really the belief behind it. So confidence also comes from having created an environment, a work environment where people can learn. So it's not that you have confidence in other people, it's that you also have confidence that you have created an environment where people can learn, where that whatever is needful can happen. And this is where the resilience comes from. So believing in team capability, that has to do with we are resilient because we can learn through, we can find the answers we need no matter what this complex VUCA, whatever world throws at us. We'll figure out our way through. And that takes away so much of the anxiety about being in that state of uncertainty, of being in that place where we really don't have a clear idea, referencing Cynefin again, probe, sense, respond. Well, how do you even choose a probe? Well, you pick one, and you're confident that whatever answers come out of that, it'll lead you to the next one and the next one. So yeah, I love the confidence one. I love all four.
I know. Confidence, though, I always love highlighting confidence, especially in the agile environments, because,
Yeah,
principle number 5 in the manifesto is all about building motivated teams and
right.
trusting them to get the work done. But no one really always said how we do that as leaders,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And what I found was so many were like, well, I trust them, but they didn't really trust them, right? They didn't really have the confidence. They had not spent the time to build the connection, to build the two-way trust that actually creates the confidence, because otherwise it is lip service. Otherwise it is something that um, causes vetoes or causes mixed messages or causes shame in other people in different ways because they've let you down and you believed in them, right? Like all these different unhealthy dynamics when you're not really truly building intentionally the confidence in that way. And I think that that's the part that when we came down to it is everybody can walk around and go, yeah, I'm compassionate, right? Or I have courage. But learning leaders are intentional about these. They're intentional to continuously go, these are not easy. We have to keep building these. We have to keep working on these. These are, we still work on these. Like, sure, we have a strength. And then actually, let me ask you, this is totally unscripted. So the whole thing is unscripted, but like Diana, what would you say is your strength one today, right? Because they may vary over time in different situations and stuff. But right now, where would you say is your strength and where's the one that you're like being more intentional about?
Um,
You have?
yeah, I do. And I don't think it's just for today. I think it's in general. That is the thing I have to pay attention to. But I think courage is my strength, is my strongest of the four, because I've always been sort of a feel the fear and do it anyway kind of person. I always figured like if I'm scared about a thing, I just have to go confront it because otherwise the fear paralyzes me or would paralyze me and so on. So I think courage is kind of my most natural, the one that you're most likely to see me doing. We talked recently about, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do for a month in Europe, but I'm just going to go find out. Right? I adaptive plan my way through it, right? So it is that, I do have that kind of let's just go figure it out. Let's work through it. So I do think courage is my strongest. Um, Probably confidence, because I do really is the one I work on the most, that I feel like I need to attend to the most, because I am so concerned about people having the work environments that they need to be able to do I mean, why I it's part of the background. I don't know if I realized it at the time, but it's part of the background for writing the Agile Retrospectives book. It's like give people some tools to be able to build their confidence in what they can do. And I'm always looking for new ways to do that, to create better environments, to give people that place where they can not only learn, but then they can actually apply their learning and things like that. So that one for me, I think, is probably the biggest challenge. And compassion and complexity are both kind of in the middle. What about you?
So I think I am similar in the courage department. I think one of my quote, superpowers is saying the thing others don't want to say or can't say. Uh, I maybe at a fault at times. I am very authentic in that regard, but I'm willing to ask the question. I'm willing to say the thing. I'm willing to challenge the situation. It doesn't mean I don't feel all the consequences of that or fears associated with that, but I would probably say that's the one that maybe I've worked the hardest on and just embracing or doing, but that one always is one that is just seems other people tell me, and highlight it about me way faster than I'll do, which is where it leads to mine. My biggest one is compassion, but for myself. Like I am so hard on myself. I am so like even in just explaining that in like strength, I'm like, no, see, I could do better, right? Like I am so uh critical, not of others, of myself. And the problem that I have discovered and have started to embrace is like I am still a role model, and so if I'm not compassionate towards myself, even if I'm compassionate towards others, they won't necessarily interpret that, or they'll put those same expectations, or they'll start doing what I do to my, it's like, don't do as I say, do it, right? Like, don't do what I'm doing. So I think compassion is the one, but specifically compassion for myself is an area that I have to always be very intentional and check myself about it,
Right.
because I can rewrite the narrative in my head that I'm just building complex, like I am just building complexity. I'm going to work on myself, right? I'm just learning, and no, I'm in a bad headspace and not being
Right.
compassionate, but I'm trying to rewrite that story in my head, right? So it's
Yeah.
definitely an area that my imposter syndrome can take hold of and cause me some challenges there.
Yeah. Yeah. That I always think about the retrospective prime directive, Norm Kurth's retrospective prime directive, about and the pushback that we get on that, which for those of you who aren't familiar with it is when we're in a retrospective or any kind of conversation with our teammates, we understand and truly believe that everyone was doing the best they could at the time, given their skills and abilities, what resources they had, the information they had, whatever else was going on in the situation, and so on. And there are a lot of folks who really push back on that. Well, I can't truly believe this. I can't, that what do you mean? And when I start questioning them about it, it's because they think they don't show up every day. And so they can't extend the trust to other people that they're showing up every day doing their best. And it's a whole conversation there about, you know, do you show up intending to do the wrong thing, intending to sabotage, intending to, no, nobody does. But
I know you're thinking of somebody. No, they're not. They're not.
yeah, there are forces at play here. But what the biggest obstacle, or the biggest objection to it very often is, well, I know I don't always do my best. And it's like, some independent standard of best that you've embraced that was the perfect day when you showed up and you had all the resources and you had all the skills and you were that those days don't happen every day, right? And sure, you had this one shining day you can point to, or maybe a series of them, I don't know. But those days aren't going to show up every day. And
And it
so,
was
I
the
mean, that
best for
is a
that
part of
day.
this compassion. That's for self-compassion and compassion for others. It really is linked to that retrospective prime directive for sure.
So we got some questions already. So let's read
Good.
an answer and start reading. If you have more questions, go ahead and put them in. I see them. So the
Yep.
first one from Fortune is how would you suggest incorporating your ideas and recommendations in leader standard work?
That feels like leader standard work. LSW is a thing that some people know about that I don't know. So this is my opportunity to learn something. But but I think it is about, well, I mean, there are a number of different ways. Read the book, see what you think about the four C's, do some in the book, after every chapter we have a series of but what if, and we have some questions and some things to think about. So you can do it that way. You could take the comparative agility assessment. I might, I'm being the collaborative kind of person I might turn to my peer group, the other people who are doing similar work to me in an organization, and say, hey, let's uh let's do this together. Let's examine this. Let's have a conversation about these four C's and how can we support each other in doing better at exhibiting these and providing these for ourselves and others. I don't know, what would you say, Tricia?
The nice part about these four seasons, it's one of the reasons we started with this as the first assessment is it can be incorporated daily in little small tasks. It doesn't have to be a massive, massive undertaking. And so pick one of the C's where you want to be a little bit more intentional and actually be intentional in the daily tasks that you're doing for that day.
Mm.
Whether the tasks are increasing your compassion associated with your task when you're getting annoyed by an email that you got, or filling out a status report form that you have to fill in, right? So the nice part is where I would say is pick one of them, get a little bit more intentional about that specific one, and then incorporate it into the daily tasks that you have.
Yeah,
You don't even need to create new things necessarily.
right.
That there it's so foundational to just how you are being present, how you are showing up as that learning leader, that you can start incorporating it, and or even just being aware of where you're slipping in those daily tasks.
Yeah.
We
And
got
Fortune has a follow-on one here about trust. I love the inclusion of caring and patience. What considerations led you to omit trust? Do you include that in patience? I include trust in every single one of these. Trust shows up in all of these in its different aspects. Um, and if you look at the rest of the book, we've got trust and psychological safety and all of those themes show up over and over and over again. But confidence is about trust that the team can do what they say they can do. Compassion is about trusting them that if you make that space and give them have the patience, you can trust them to learn what they need to learn. I mean, it's all through here, and yeah,
and we were very intentional as well because we agree actually in one of the resilience factors, collaborative connection, there's a whole section on trust specifically,
yeah,
and that you can't just go trust me or do
yeah,
a trust fall, and
right,
so that is we did it very intentionally there, but we were going with the C theme here
yeah,
on top of it, but it actually is a full
yeah,
section in the book specifically
yeah,
for the connection, collaborative connections resilience
yeah,
factor.
yeah.
We have an anonymous attendee asking a question. I'm not a team lead. Our team lead defaults to blame and shame. I'm assuming this is unknowingly. Good job, compassion there. How do you recommend handling this environment in a company that adheres to a hierarchical structure?
Well, I think this is structure agnostic, actually. I mean, I think a command and control kind of hierarchical structure might foster it more, might foster the blame and shame more, but it might not. I mean, I have been in organizations that had the whole pyramid organizational structure, but people cared about each other and they were supportive. And, so it's not so much about the structure as it is about understanding the impact of behaviors. And it is that it's, like in DEI and a lot of other areas, it's that impact rather than the intent. Generally speaking, I am willing to believe that anyone who comes up blaming and shaming others is most likely thinking that's going to motivate them to do better and therefore feel better about themselves, right? They're not doing it to make you feel bad, but the impact is that it does make people feel bad. And it doesn't just make the blamed person feel bad, it makes everybody who has witnessed that blame feel bad. And so you're losing discretionary energy and engagement all over the place with blaming and shaming. I mean, I'm people sometimes call me a pragmatic visionary or a visionary pragmatic but I am a very pragmatic person. And so on the one hand, not blaming and shaming is the right thing to do, human to human. But on the other hand, it's also the practical thing because blaming and shaming diverts attention and energy and effort into covering myself so that I'm not the next person to be blamed. All of these things happen. Or if it goes all the way to shame, I'm spending a lot of time cycling that shame around in myself and not giving that attention and energy and effort to my work. And so in some ways, I if you're an individual contributor, but you have a team lead, unless that team lead is in a management relationship with you where they can hire and fire you or determine your compensation or whatever those kinds of things are, then you're peers. You're on the team, they're on the team. They do some additional things on the team than you do on the team. You probably do some additional things that they don't do on the team, right? So in that instance, I would just say, hey, I just read this book or I just saw this webinar and I'd like to give you some feedback because I really want us to have the best possible working relationship. And I want you to have the best chance at any sort of promotion or any other kinds of benefits that you'd like to get out of this. And here's the thing I noticed. When you said X in our last meeting, I noticed that Y over here, our teammate, really shut down. And I was really interested in what they were just about to say. I'm wondering if I think it was just your kind of instinctive response or your habitual response, but I think it's getting in our way. How can we do something about this? Compassionately, but courageously giving feedback, right? Particularly to your peers. It's so much more powerful. Feedback is so much more powerful coming from a peer than coming from a leader. Because like a manager leader, right? That has all this other kinds of power dynamics over you in the situation. So that would be, I'd sort of start there. And if that doesn't work, or if you're If that just feels too uncomfortable, then we could talk about more kinds of ways that you could deal with it. But if they're doing it unknowingly, unless somebody puts it into their awareness, how are they going to change? Right.
I we have a statement in the book, something to the effect of not all leaders should be emulated, right? We lead the
Right.
way that we were led, and not all leaders should be emulated. The
Right.
reality is this person might have pressures, might have been taught specific things, might have been rewarded and recognized for some of the very behaviors that you're frustrated by.
Yeah.
And so part of this is also in giving that feedback is understanding that there might be some cognitive dissonance for that individual in terms of what they've been told, what they've seen, what they've experienced up to this point, and what your feedback is. And so the more that you can align on that shared goal, we both want to be successful. We want this project to be successful. We want this company to be said that we want our customers to be successful. We have this shared meaningful goal and purpose, but we might have a differing of how to get there the best ways, and let's explore that, because I think a lot of times it's easy to kind of point our fingers up a little bit and manage up. I hear that a lot. It's like, how do I manage up? And I will always try and revise that statement of how do I partner up? And that's really what the heart of what Diana is getting to is how do they know if no one ever tells them? But if we're not telling them in a way that they can really hear it versus their defensive strategies just coming up, then we're going to be in
Right.
it's going to get worse before it gets better kind of dynamic. So
Right.
really lead in with that compassion part with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have go
And
ahead.
wherever you are, just because you're having these kinds of thoughts on your team means you are an informal leader. You are trying to make things better for your team. And I want to thank you for that and acknowledge you for that and say these things apply for you too. Go ahead, Tricia. We
There's
had some
two
also
in
some, yeah, in the chat
chat.
we had some
Yeah.
questions as well. Yeah.
So there's one from Karen. What do you advise for those working with a leader or leaders that don't have self-compassion to acknowledge that they don't have all the answers and their stance? Oops, good job at this. Stance is that they do just get it done in the given timeline, but their stance is
Yeah.
just get it done in the given timeline.
Right.
Self-compassion, acknowledge they don't
Yeah.
have all the answers in their stance. So I always have a saying that there are certain parts of the system that you can't change. I mean, the only times in my career that I was like, oh, I'm getting fired today is when I went too far with going, let's just blow up the whole thing because it's just too much for somebody. And if that leader has a just get it done in the given time frame, there are system issues that they feel they can't control, they can't change, they can't do anything about. And so they're frustrated and trying to walk this fine line that just then makes them ripple the negative down. And that's not great. I'm not
Right.
excusing that by any means, but I am saying let's get creative within the bounds that we have. We can start to get creative with what we can control. And so you don't have to tackle the entire elephant. You just want to help, I was going to say a part of the elephant, but that makes it sound like I'm hurting the elephant. I don't want to hurt an elephant. So we'll wash, okay? We don't have to wash the entire elephant, but you might just focus on just an ear, right? And going, okay, maybe this is something that you can start a lunch and learn on building self-compassion. And it's something that isn't targeted at any one individual because chances are we all could benefit from it. I already said I could, right? And so it's something that you could engage with that leader on without it being a feedback kind of situation or without it being a confrontational situation, but also a learning opportunity for what is that lack of self-compassion really kind of creating in terms of our environment. And then there's the other elements of, okay, so if it's just get it done within the given timeline, what can we do? Can we just increase our transparency? Like, are we just going to be radically transparent about what that impact of that is going to be, how, what's going to happen as a result of this approach, right? And in a lot of cases, maybe that's all you can do in terms of responsibility is be more courageously transparent about what the result is going to be instead of just trying to, we're going to burn out, we're going to lose this, we're going to drop quality. And they're not going to want to hear that either. But maybe that's all you can control is not the changing of the entire system because it's set up based on how finance is working in the organization, how the PMO is working in the organization, how sales, whatever it might be. And so, but what you can control is what you are acknowledging in terms of risk, right? And so it's something where I try and say, don't try and tackle the entire system complex, impediment. Tackle just one part of it if you can.
Mhm. Well, and it may have to do also with the way, um, you know, uh, way you frame expectations. I mean, maybe just not just, maybe being able to say, um, hey, we're running into this issue. I don't expect you to have all the answers, but can you point us in a direction? And kind of let them off the hook, right?
Oh, I love that.
And so and then if they want to have all the answers, they muscle their way back in. Well, then that's another thing. But sometimes it takes, I mean, it's not one instance that's going to make the change. It's, what is it? Be like water on the rock, wear it away slowly but surely. Yeah, right. And then we have one more question, I think, before we will wrap up. How do you collaborate with team members that are adamantly against team cohesion? Those team members are solely focused on individual efforts with no regards of team performance and improvement. This kind of question has been coming up more and more lately in different forums in different places. And it makes me wonder if that the rise in this question has also to do with the rise in remote work. Although way back 20 years ago when Agile was first starting to come on the scene and the focus was so much on teamwork, I remember talking to a very well-regarded software engineer who was super senior, you know, the one of the, a cowboy coder, when and just give me my closet. Don't make me work with anyone. And, at the time, I didn't really have the language to talk to them about that. But the work that we do now is so dependent. I mean, if we're talking about dependencies, it is so dependent on us being able to integrate everything we do with all the other people. There are so few projects that can be done by only one person. If you can find those products, that next feature that one person perfectly adequate can do it all, well, let them do that. But there are not very many that are like that anymore. Most of the things that we do, because they're complex, because all kinds of reasons, they require us to be able to put our stuff together, to be able to integrate, to have that kind of to have that collective the ownership of the outcome of the work and the collective, say, coding standards, for instance. And so I think that helping people understand that it's no longer an option in the kind of work we do to be only focused on your own effort. And if your system, if your department believes that it is possible for that, then you might be wanting to buff up your resume or something because it's just not true. We have to be able to build on each other's work. We have to, sooner or later, it all has to come together before we can deliver it, before if nothing else, we've got to be incorporating the testing perspective as we go along. And so there is no, in software work today, there are very few um, opportunities for just individual contributorship that is never going to have to integrate with anybody else's work. And so we are reliant on the team.
I do
They aren't going to get kudos on their own without being able to work with the other folks on their team.
I do
So,
agree that there's an aspect of the remote because then I can just do my part whenever I want to do my part. I do
mhm,
believe that there is an aspect of as Fortune highlighted in like layoffs and the stack ranking and how they do performance reviews that contribute to that. I
yeah,
do also think that there has been bad managerial approach to conflict in the past in organizations that has reinforced people's behaviors in terms of, well, I'm just going to get blamed if I if
yeah,
I have this issue with somebody else, it's just easier if I don't work with anybody. There's also an element of inclusivity in terms of, are we really creating inclusive collaborative spaces for
yeah.
everybody? And it's not just a person that doesn't want to, it's a person who doesn't feel safe to. And so there are so many complex elements that can be contributing, and
Yeah.
it's different for different situations and different people and different dynamics as to what might make sense. So you just wanted us to end on an if it depends scenario question, didn't you? Like, because it really, what I might advise in one scenario might be totally different in a different scenario. I had somebody that was adamant, and I did end up moving that person onto an R&D kind of project. They got to just work by themselves. And then fast forward about 4 years later, they came back to me and they're like, my career has stalled and everybody else is moving forward. I think I need something to change. Right. But that's where they were mentally. In another case, we had to make adjustments to performance reviews before we saw that behavior adjust because of the system that they were in. And in another case, somebody had told them that they weren't very good and they were holding on to that. And so they weren't collaborating, not because they didn't want to collaborate. It was a safety dynamic to avoid collaborating. So I really would probably say you have to dig in a little bit as to what
Yeah.
might be some of the reasons or even the shared reasons, and then there are probably other non-shared reasons that is making that person be adamant with that, and then trying to figure out again, how can you get creative within those bounds.
This is exactly why I valued partnering with Tricia on this book so much. Is that, we both brought different perspectives to it. And yay, Tricia, thank you for that. It depends answer.
And yes, and in general, just as the things like, as part of the world right now, I think is what makes me actually love this content even more, and working with Diane and stuff, because with all the layoffs, with all the all sorts of things that I'll leave at that. I have to lean in even more to these four C's for hope. And I want more leaders leaning into these to give more hope for these kinds of questions and situations to not be as common as unfortunately they are right now.